Check out Science Friday's bumbling of the trans legislation coverage. Of course I did.
Check out Science Friday's bumbling of the trans legislation
Excuse me.
coverage.
And then the question is, which media outlets will talk honestly about this topic? Yeah, not many. And God, Sarah Silverman came out on the wrong side of this week.
Well,
I just feel like this is one of the most obvious. This is one of the most obvious issues that we are contending with as a society right now.
Well, actually, a number of the things that we have talked about today remind me of this basic principle, which is that certain stories diagnose the system, right? The fact that the New York Times and actually the mainstream press couldn't figure out what to do with the Evergreen story diagnosed the problem, right? If all you had to do was
diagnose the problem with the media.
Right. All you had to know was what actually happened, which is fascinating. You would expect the media to be all over it because they like fascinating stuff, right? They weren't all over it. Oh, so there's something going on there that makes this story impossible to report. Okay, so that tells you what's going on. And the trans story is exactly this, right? You have a genuine and very broadly shared desire to be compassionate that then quickly runs into trade-offs, right? Am I compassionate with people who genuinely find themselves feeling that they are trapped in the wrong body and want to transition? Yeah, I very much want to help such a person. I get what that would be like, and it would not be easy, right? On the other hand, do I want women protected from predatory men who want to avail themselves of a protected status? Yes, I do. And there are more of them, but it's a more generic story. So the point is, you can see how people who have some simple heuristic trip over this and find themselves saying something in order to defend one or the other category, and they can't see the nuance.
But I mean, this feels even simpler. Like, to me, men who self-identify as women without even any requirement for hormones or surgery and therefore get to go into women's crisis centers and prisons is really obviously a problem. But some number of those men are just looking for a better situation, and some number of them really do suddenly realize that they feel like women. Whatever. This one seems even simpler. Like the trans legislation thing that is being talked about, I assume, although I haven't seen this particular coverage, is about trans women in women's sports. It's about sports, which you just have to have been on the planet for, I don't know, through puberty to recognize that men and women are different. And, maybe you need to have thought about it a tiny bit to recognize that actually all of that stuff that has been making the male pathway and the female pathway different since fertilization is not reversible with a simple switch, a simple toggle of, some puberty blockers and some hormones and even some surgery. No, not reversible. It doesn't work that way.
Well, okay. This is obvious to us, and it will be hopefully obvious to anybody who's paid attention to what we've said on this topic for any length of time. But you can imagine the problem is heuristics, right?
Yeah.
People are used to navigating by heuristics. And the fact is, people do it because heuristics are in general so freaking useful, right? But in the case that, let's imagine you were having a dinner party, right? 100 people, and some of those people.
It's a big party.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not a dinner party.
It's a hypothetical. You're not going to have to do anything.
No one has 100 people dinner parties in this century, I don't think. That's not a dinner party.
You're right.
That's like a wedding.
You're right. All right. Let's suppose you're having a dinner party with 3 people.
It's more my style.
Yeah, no, totally. It is more your style.
Yeah.
No, let's imagine it's 20 people.
Okay. You're having a dinner party.
Right. I'm having a dinner party. 20 people.
I'm invited and I may come.
Okay. It's barbecue because I can do that.
Yeah.
But all right. So the point is there's a dinner party and every one of your guests, save 2, my guests, save 2, are totally on board with treating our trans friend who will be present exactly as they would hope to be treated, right? And then, did I say 2 friends are exceptions?
You did.
And we have 2 friends who are overly fond of, the kind of Ben Shapiro approach to this, where they're, aggressive about pointing out the ways in which transness is not a complete transformation, etc.
Okay.
Right? And the point is, you can imagine a desire to get everybody on board with the majority in that case and their willingness to behave kindly towards your guest.
Being nice actually gets us where we need to go in this
It's
situation.
the right thing to do, right? And so the point is, okay, we can see the situation.
Also, our bathrooms are already co-ed spaces.
They're really single-person spaces.
Well, this is the point.
Okay.
Like, these things don't scale. So people imagine your
Right.
dinner party, and then they're like, well,
Right.
so that'll just work.
It happens. We don't have a prison. Our bathrooms work for either sex,
Yes.
right? You don't even have to tell us what sex you identify as when you go in.
Nope. No
So-
signs on the doors.
Right, exactly. So this is all very simple.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of getting everybody to behave in the same courteous way, okay? Then you build a heuristic from that. And the point is, look, treat people how they want to be treated. It's the right thing to do, right? It's a good heuristic until you get to sports, prisons, and all of the other things that force you to actually engage a deeper question. What's going on with Sarah Silverman? She wrote a heuristic, right?
Mhm.
That heuristic has now been gamed. And
Well, but she also, and maybe this just came after the heuristic. You may be exactly right, but I think I just saw like a 30-second clip of her going off on this week in exactly the wrong position. She says, "Well, why don't we segregate sex by height?" It's like, okay, you are. I think that there's a conflation of individual versus population level stuff. But if you're really arguing that we shouldn't be segregating sport by sex, and that is just as artificial as segregating sport by height, I think I may have misspoke last time, then you're arguing for all co-ed sports, which is the end of women in sport, at least at the professional level, right? Like, because with a very few exceptions, like maybe long distance running, like super long distance running, like hyper long distance running, like 100 miles, men will outcompete women in feats of raw power and speed and strength. They just will. And like, why don't we segregate sports by height? Well, like some sports effectively do.
Yep.
Like basketball effectively does.
And they sideline everybody. Basketball sidelines everybody who isn't tall, and boxing does segregate by weight.
Yep.
Right.
Right. And so it depends on the sport, but in every case, again, with the maybe possible exception of extreme long distance running, there's differences. And if you don't segregate by sex, then that's the end of women's sports. And is that really what you want?
Well, I can't remember where it happened. It may have been in one of the Patreon discussions, or it may have been on DarkHorse, maybe in a Q&A. But I actually believe that this topic is going to bring about the end of sport as we know it, because these questions actually are difficult, right? So if you, in the original case, you have a genetic lottery, you get whatever endowment you have genetically, then you make whatever you can of it. You get good at things, you develop skills, you innovate new techniques, whatever. And that is exciting to see play out on a soccer field or whatever, right? Who's really good at this game, who knows something other people don't know, who's, better at intuiting the dynamics on the field, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to doping. Right. Oh, well, I can take what I was genetically awarded and I can augment it in this way. I can borrow from my future self and I can enrich myself in the present by doing it, literally enrich. Right. And so I can basically cheat. And then there's a arms race about, can you cheat in such a way that we can't see that that's what you're doing? But the point is, we're not in Kansas anymore at the point that takes over your sport. And then you get into questions about, well, why don't we have height classes and have 4 basketball leagues? Is a game of short people playing against on a court with short baskets less exciting? What if they're more talented? That could be really interesting, right? And so the point is, you get into this never-ending sequence of like, well, what really is athletic talent? And the point is, well, one thing it is at the point you're parsing how much of it is genes and how much of it is economics, incentives, and all of this thing is it's just a lot less fun. So I wonder if it isn't all going to come apart as a result of this. And if, I don't think that means it's the end of athleticism. I think what it means is athleticism will be reborn in probably a more interesting way. And I would put on the table, Olympic gymnastics. Those are really talented people doing something really boring, right? It's like sort of exciting to see that a person can do that, but it's very hard to distinguish one routine from the next. It's subtleties. You have to be an expert to detect most of them, right?
Mhm.
And so the point is,
Well, the distinction we've made before is between that and watching a great parkour routine.
exactly.
Right.
And the point is, you can't compare two parkour routines in the same way. It's subjective. But
Mhm.
once you sign up for, okay, I accept that it's subjective, it's much more interesting and very demanding.
I mean, we should do a whole episode on this or more, but there's a difference between sport and athleticism, right? Because athleticism isn't inherently competitive and sport is.
Yep.
And so like athleticism plus competition gets you to sport.
Yep.
And some of the things that we have in the Olympics, for instance, have seemed to many of us for a long time, and we're hardly the first people to point out, it's like, is that really sport? Like, does competition really belong there? And if so, like, on what basis is it being judged? And maybe it just but we went to what was it, like the X Games? Is that what it's called? Once, not the X Games. That's wrong. The games once with a lot of, like, it was parkour and it was BMX bikers and skateboarders, and outside in San Francisco once many years ago. Can't remember what they're called. This is obvious, but anyway, yes, they were being judged. There's no simple metric, right? Like, this is
Right.
with regard to competition, the world wants a simple metric, a simple linear variable, speed, speed down the hill, speed down the hill or speed through the thing in combination with this many jumps or this much time in the air. Like, you just
Yep.
add metric after metric after metric. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, those 4 guys who just did that were all awesome. And for me, watching those, like, I never care about like who is declared the winner. But of course, in order for the market to work and for there to be a game for us to go see, a competition for us to go see, there has to be someone who's declared the winner. Whereas, basketball, with an established height, which isn't 3 feet lower for shorter people. I don't know how much it would have to be lower. A foot and a half lower for shorter people would be a different game. Could be an interesting game, but then you have to start imposing height limits.
Right.
Yes, and so there really is a difference between play and sport and athleticism, and we conflate them all. And the fact is that men and women are going to have different facilities, and some sports really give themselves to co-ed. I mean, I've talked before about Ultimate, how much we both
Absolutely.
love playing Ultimate, and like, I specifically, having played competitively on women's teams and watched at those same tournaments a lot of men's teams and played a lot of co-ed, always preferred the co-ed games. They were just more interesting to be part of, always.
And it's structured to work.
And it's
Structured so the men
structured to
don't
work.
dominate the women in those games.
Yes.
Even though the usual athletic comparison still applies.
Yes, exactly. But some games, some kinds of sport, some kinds of games won't work that way.
Yep. No, most don't. Most don't. I will say, just my last contribution here is that I do think we have kind of a societal pathology surrounding what you were discussing with respect to our desire to have a metric that we can exactly compare.
Yeah.
And you actually
Yes.
see this in lots of places. If you follow cameras and you watch the absurd, there are certain
It's
statistics that
reductionism.
dominate. Right.
Yeah.
But that, I realized in teaching, specifically because Evergreen freed us to do whatever we needed to do in order to get the job done, that actually there was a world open to us once you accept the subjectivity of evaluation.
Yeah.
And the fact is, I don't think what I was doing was any more subjective than what mostly gets done, but people have this pseudo quantification mechanism where, well, you're going to turn in an essay and then I'm going to give you, points out of 100, and then I'm going to put the number in my book. And then at the end of the term, we're going to count those numbers. And the point is,
I don't know if most people use numbers for essays, but
whatever they do,
Yeah.
it amounts to pseudo quantification. And the
Yes,
point is,
for
look,
sure.
as long as you got a layer in there that's subjective, your thing is subjective.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't own up to that,
Yeah.
Right. You
No,
don't.
this is huge. I mean, this is a second vastly important topic, one of pseudo quantification, and one in which, and I think the more enumerate you are, the more easily you are fooled when numbers are presented to you. And
Yep.
so the more likely you are to think when you get presented with, like, here's a ranking, here's the answers, here's what the data say, and you're like, oh, well, there's numbers, this must be the truth. Like, actually, often though, none of that was legitimate, because there was some trick somewhere in there, and sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's not. Often people just don't have any idea that you can't, you can't turn those subjective things over there into numbers and pretend that it was quantitative all the time, the whole time.
Right. And the thing is, basketball is kind of objective. If you've got referees, it's all done in public. The referees judge the rules. The rules are known to everybody. And how many times, within the rules, the ball goes through the basket dictates the number of points. So that isn't one of these things. But so many things.
Nor baseball, nor soccer, nor football, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
Tennis.
those things are not of this nature. But the number of things that are subjective and pretend to be something else by virtue of some hand-waving argument for making them objective is shocking.
Yeah.
And the degree to which things get more interesting once you say, okay, subjectivity, that's part of this one. It doesn't make parkour less interesting to watch. Right. It's subjective, but wow, are those people talented? And that's some pretty amazing stuff you wouldn't think you could do.
Yeah.